Azure IoT Hub, questions and answers. 51. How does Azure IoT Hub handle quotas and throttling? Azure IoT Hub has specific quotas for message size, throughput, and the number of devices. Exceeding these will result in throttling. 52. What APIs are available for interacting with Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub provides REST APIs, device SDKs, and service SDKs for various interaction models. 53. How can you export data from Azure IoT Hub? Data can be exported to various Azure services like Azure Blob Storage, Azure Table Storage, or Azure Event Hubs via configured endpoints. 54. How can you import data into Azure IoT Hub? Data import into Azure IoT Hub is typically performed by devices sending telemetry data, but you can also use the IoT Hub REST APIs for this purpose. 55. What are the different types of endpoints available in Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub offers various endpoints like the built-in endpoint for device messages, custom endpoints for message routing, and cloud-side endpoints for IoT Hub operations. 56. How can Azure Functions be used with Azure IoT Hub? Azure Functions can be triggered by Azure IoT Hub events or messages, allowing you to execute serverless code in response. 57. What is Azure IoT Edge and how does it integrate with IoT Hub? Azure IoT Edge allows analytics and custom logic to run on IoT devices, and it integrates with IoT Hub to manage devices and send telemetry data to the cloud. 58. How does Azure IoT Central relate to Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Central is an IoT application platform that is built on top of Azure IoT Hub, providing a more user-friendly interface for device management and analytics. 59. What is Operations Monitoring in Azure IoT Hub? Operations monitoring allows you to track operations on your IoT Hub, such as device connections and disconnections or incoming and outgoing messages. 60. What is the device registry in Azure IoT Hub? The device registry is a repository of all registered devices that can connect to the IoT Hub, allowing you to manage device identities. 61. How is device identity established in Azure IoT Hub? Device identity is established through unique device IDs and authentication using either symmetric keys or X.509 certificates. 62. What is a device connection string in Azure IoT Hub? A device connection string is a set of key-value pairs used to identify and authenticate a device when connecting to Azure IoT Hub. 63. How does file upload work in Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub supports file uploads from devices to Azure Blob Storage, providing a secure and scalable way to send large files. 64. What are IoT Hub units and how do they affect scalability? IoT Hub units are essentially the number of simultaneous connections and messages that can be managed. More units mean higher throughput and more connected devices. 65. What IoT protocols are supported by Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub supports MQTT, AMQP, and HTTPS for device-to-cloud and cloud-to-device communications. 66. What are cloud endpoints in Azure IoT Hub? Cloud endpoints are predefined endpoints to which IoT Hub routes messages for processing, such as Azure Functions, Stream Analytics, or Event Hubs. 67. What are device endpoints in Azure IoT Hub? Device endpoints are endpoints on the device side, used to establish and maintain communication with the IoT Hub. 68. What are consumer groups in Azure IoT Hub? Consumer groups are used in Azure IoT Hub to allow multiple consuming services to read the data independently from the same partition. 69. How does Azure IoT Hub support failover and disaster recovery? Azure IoT Hub supports manual failover to a paired secondary region to ensure availability in case of a regional failure. 70. What are some unique features of Azure IoT device SDKs? Features include support for multiple languages, automatic reconnection, and methods for sending telemetry and receiving cloud-to-device messages. 71. How does Azure Monitor integrate with Azure IoT Hub? Azure Monitor can capture metrics and logs from Azure IoT Hub, allowing for advanced analytics and alerting. 72. Can you apply Azure policies to Azure IoT Hub? Yes, you can apply Azure policies to enforce rules and compliance standards on Azure IoT Hub configurations. 73. How long does Azure IoT Hub retain device messages by default? By default, Azure IoT Hub retains device messages for 1 day, but this is configurable. 74. How does Azure IoT Hub facilitate bidirectional communication? Azure IoT Hub allows both cloud-to-device and device-to-cloud communication through various protocols like MQTT, AMQP, and HTTPS. 75. What types of security tokens are supported by Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub supports both SAS, shared access signatures, tokens and X.509 certificates for device authentication. 76. How does Azure IoT Hub handle telemetry data? Azure IoT Hub ingests telemetry data from devices and can route it to various Azure services like Azure Storage, Azure Stream Analytics, or custom endpoints for further processing. 77. What device management features are offered by Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub offers features like device twins, direct methods, and device queries for comprehensive device management. 78. Does Azure IoT Hub support autoscaling? Azure IoT Hub doesn't natively support autoscaling, but you can programmatically scale it using Azure Monitor and Azure Automation. 79. What is the maximum size of a cloud-to-device message in Azure IoT Hub? The maximum size for a cloud-to-device message is 64 kilobytes. 80. What are device methods in Azure IoT Hub? Device methods are direct methods that you can invoke on a device from the cloud, useful for interactive control of devices. 81. What are some key metrics to monitor in Azure IoT Hub? Important metrics include message throughput, connection success rate, and error rates. 82. What are the different pricing tiers available in Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub offers different pricing tiers like Basic, Standard, and Free, each with varying features and limitations. 83. How does Azure IoT Hub handle rate limiting? Azure IoT Hub enforces rate limits based on the SKU and the number of units, with specific limits on messages per second and other operations. 84. How can you integrate Azure Stream Analytics with Azure IoT Hub? Azure Stream Analytics can be set as a custom endpoint in Azure IoT Hub to process and analyze incoming telemetry data in real time. 85. How do you perform bulk operations in Azure IoT Hub? Bulk operations can be performed using IoT Hub's Jobs feature, enabling tasks like updating device twins or invoking methods on multiple devices. 86. How does Azure IoT Hub ensure data synchronization between devices and the cloud? Azure IoT Hub uses device twins and reported/desired properties to synchronize the state between devices and the cloud. 87. What are routing queries in Azure IoT Hub? Routing queries are SQL-like queries that define the conditions under which messages are routed to custom endpoints. 88. How do Azure IoT Solution Accelerators work with Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Solution Accelerators are pre-built solutions that are based on Azure IoT Hub and other Azure services, designed to speed up IoT project development. 89. What compliance standards does Azure IoT Hub meet? Azure IoT Hub is compliant with various standards like ISO 27001, ISO 27018, and HIPAA among others. 90. What debugging tools are available for Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub provides debugging tools such as Azure Monitor, built-in diagnostics, and integration with Azure Application Insights for in-depth analytics and troubleshooting. 91. How does Azure IoT Hub ensure high availability? Azure IoT Hub offers multi-region failover and geo-disaster recovery to ensure high availability. 92. How does partitioning work in Azure IoT Hub? Partitioning in Azure IoT Hub works similarly to Azure Event Hubs, where messages are distributed across a set number of partitions for scalability and parallel processing. 93. What is connection resiliency in Azure IoT Hub? Connection resiliency is the feature where the device SDKs for Azure IoT automatically handle disconnection and reconnection logic, ensuring continuous data flow. 94. How can Azure Logic Apps be integrated with Azure IoT Hub? Azure Logic Apps can be triggered by events in Azure IoT Hub, enabling automated workflows in response to device telemetry or state changes. 95. What are the quotas and throttling mechanisms in Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub imposes quotas on message size, the number of messages per day, and other resource-intensive operations. Exceeding these quotas will result in throttling. 96. How can Azure Event Grid be used with Azure IoT Hub? Azure Event Grid can be integrated to respond to events triggered in Azure IoT Hub, enabling real-time analytics and automation. 97. Does Azure IoT Hub support end-to-end (E2E) encryption? While Azure IoT Hub ensures secure communication to and from the cloud, end-to-end encryption should be implemented at the application layer. 98. How can you export data from Azure IoT Hub? Data from Azure IoT Hub can be exported to various Azure services like Azure Blob Storage, Azure Table Storage, or external databases using Azure Functions or Stream Analytics. 99. What third-party monitoring solutions can integrate with Azure IoT Hub? Third-party solutions like Splunk and Datadog can integrate with Azure IoT Hub through Azure Monitor. 100. What types of redundancy are offered by Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub offers local redundancy within the same data center and geo-redundancy across multiple data centers for failover and disaster recovery. Thanks for watching.